Well, I'd like to welcome you to the second in our series of Young Adult Writers series, which we started last spring. It was an effort by the library to bring writers in our community, the wonderful wealth of writers we have in our community, to young adult writers, young writers such as yourselves, to the library to talk about writing, to hear from writers about their craft and the art of publishing and the process of writing. And and also to open up the discussion about what is it to be a writer, what is a writer, and to celebrate also your writing, the writing that you're doing. So an important part of our series is to hear from you, to hear your voices, as well as some of the other writers in our community. It was to provide an opportunity. We feel it's very important to hear what you have to say, to hear what your thoughts are, to hear your thinking and your feelings. And that's why we've devoted half of the program to your writing. And so what I'd like to do is to invite you to share your writing. If you haven't brought it tonight, to maybe come back. On this series, we're going to have another 4 evenings of writings. We're going to have Cheryl Nothe and Dick Ostheimer next week. Cheryl's a poet who has collaborated with Dick, who's here tonight, and has made music out of the writing that Cheryl has done. It's just a wonderful, exciting celebration of writing. And then the next week we'll have Dee McNamer, who is a Montana native, grew up in somewhere like Choteau, Montana. Conrad, thank you. I mean, Choteau, Conrad, you know. And anyway, has written a couple of books about her experiences growing up in eastern Montana and her experiences as a young adult. And it's really a wonderful, wonderful novel. And just came out with another novel recently called One Sweet Quarrel. The other 2 events on the series, the 2 evenings will be with the Missoula Writing Collaborative, many of the writers that you've met in the schools who have come in to work with you. And they'll be sharing their works on that program on the 12th. And that will be at Bojangles at 7:30. And then on the 19th, we're going to invite all the writers from the high schools, all the teachers and the students to share their writing. You will be the featured writers that night. So I'd like to welcome you to our series and welcome you to the library. And thank you for coming. And to also thank the Missoula Writing Collaborative and the Friends of the Library for sponsoring this event. Thank you to Freddy's for providing the treats tonight. Thank you to Gwen and Eric and Becky for videotaping this tonight. It will be aired on MCAT at some point. And also these videos will be available through the high school libraries in our library for you to review and maybe reflect back on what Dan has said. And also I'd like to thank Nate and some of the other journalists from the high schools who have covered this event and will possibly be covering it for their newspaper. So thanks you guys for spreading the word. On Saturday coming up from 1 to 4, there will be a writing workshop, at which time you will be able to bring your writing, meet with some of the writers from the Missoula Writing Collaborative who will sit down with you and talk through your work, and you can share your work with them, and then they can maybe give you some feedback on your writing, and maybe help you maybe work it out to make it a little more clear, make it what you really wanted to say. So that will be from 1 to 4 this Saturday. Dick will be available at 3 for a reading. So in this room at 3 on Saturday, there will be a reading of those people who are participating, and you'll have an opportunity to read with Dick at that time. For tonight, we are very pleased to have as our guest Dan Baum, noted journalist and the author of a new book, Smoke and Mirrors, which we have a couple copies of, which Dan could sign for you if you'd like to purchase one. Freddie Speed and Reed brought the books tonight, and we have just 2 copies. They had only 2 copies left, but we'd be glad to sell them to you for and have Dan sign them. So Dan Baum is our guest. He is a journalist, and a journalist is someone who, like other readers, takes a fine lens to their world and captures it in words. But while other writers will maybe make a story, a fictionalized story to interpret the world, Dan depicts it clearly and as carefully and conscientiously as he can, as he sees it. And that is the role, I feel, of journalists, is to provide a lens and a mirror onto our world to tell us exactly what our world is about. And that is the fine craft of journalism. And Dan has been a journalist for many years with the Atlantic Constitution, with the Wall Street Journal. He's published articles in such magazines as Sierra, The Nation, Leather Jones, Buzzworm, The Smithsonian. And tonight he's here, I'm very pleased to say, to talk about a book that he's written called Smoke and Mirrors, which is a very, very important work reflecting on the last 30 years of our nation's quest to fight the drug war. And so Dan is here to talk about that book as well as his career as a journalist. So I'd like to welcome Dan Baum. Thank you.
How long do I have?
Say till 8:15, 8:30.
Okay. Hello, thank you all very much for coming. I talk very fast. I'm from back east. We talk very fast back east, and I have a lot I want to say. I mean no disrespect by it. If I go too fast, just hold up your hand and stop me. I also tend to talk faster as I get going, and this is a topic I really like talking about. I'm not going to talk about smoke and mirrors, unless you specifically ask me to, except about the writing of it and about the researching of it. I want to talk about 2 things tonight. I want to first talk about the writer's life, and then I want to talk about the craft a little bit. There is no better life than the life of a writer, I don't think. I mean, if you had somebody in here who loves being a doctor, he'd probably tell you that. If you had somebody in here who loves fixing cars, she'd probably tell you the best thing in the world to do is to be a mechanic. But I'm here to tell you that the writer's life is the finest life there is, and I urge you all to work on it and get there, because I can't tell you how privileged I feel all the time to wake up in the morning and say, geez Louise, I make my living as a writer. And it's a meager living, it's a nervous living, it is a financially precarious living. Very few writers get rich, but it is really pleasant. When I wanted to write back from when I was a kid, from when I was younger than you, and I'd write these silly little stories, and then when I was in high school and college and kind of sinking into this dark, introspective teenage and post-teenage bleak period of mine, lonely bleak period of mine, I would just sit and write these kind of endlessly introspective, self-referential, tortured little pieces, and on a typewriter. This is back before computers, and I would just save them and keep them, and I would send them as letters to my brother. Then for a while I got into writing long letters to people and keeping carbons. Again, this is back before computers, so you put carbon paper on another piece of paper in the typewriter, and that was how I wrote. That was kind of how I published, and I would write 8-page single-spaced typewritten letters to friends and my brother, and by way of trying to do my own poetry and tell my own stories and that kind of thing. Then I limped through college, got out, decided, I really want to do it. I really want to be a writer. And so I went out west, and within 6 months I had spent all my money and gotten sick, and I was back living with my parents, and that was one of those painful, terrible experiences upon which writers can draw in the future. That's one of the great things about being a writer, by the way, is that nothing is wasted and no pain is pure pain, because you can always draw on it. If you do some terribly embarrassing thing with somebody, or you fail at something miserably, or you just have some god-awful experience, you can always say to yourself, well, it's grist. That's what Joan Didion always used to say. That's grist. We'll just file that away, and someday we'll use that. But I took myself off to Europe and got this little hovel in West Berlin, back when there was a West Berlin, and I just got weird. I didn't talk to anybody, and I grew a big beard, and I lived in this little $35 a month apartment with no heat or electricity, with oil lamps, and just sat in there. I got a German typewriter and figured out the German keyboard, and just kind of sat and wrote 3 really god-awful novellas. I mean, just egregious. They were awful. But what they did, I mean, they're unpublished, and my own mother said they sucked. But what that did for me was it got me past the panic of the blank page. Because I don't know if you feel this, but even I've been writing now for 20 years, and for a living, just about almost 20 years, and I still sometimes sit down and look at now it's a blank screen instead of a blank page, and I kind of panic. But that time where I just applied myself to it every day, got up, and worked and looked at the type. And there were days where I would just look at the typewriter all day, and just and that was my day's work. And then get up and walk around, go get a beer, come back and look at the typewriter some more. And sometimes those days felt wasted, but in retrospect, you got to do that. And you got to remember that everybody who writes great stuff wrote bad stuff first. You kind of got to get through writing all the bad stuff. You got to get through being afraid of the blank page. You got to get through the wasted time. You got to get through the stuff that when you read it 6 months later, it makes you so embarrassed you want to jump out a window. And you will have plenty of that. You will go back and look at your stuff and say, "Oh my God," But you have to do all that. That's all. It's a process. My brother, who was an artist, he was a visual artist, but he used to. We used to have these long talks, and art is process. Art is not product. A painting on the wall, something you can hold, or a book you can hold in your hand. Well, that's not art. Art went into that, but the art is the process. It's the doing of it. It's the first draft. In the writing context, it's the first draft, and then it's the revisions and the revisions and the revisions. I mentioned my brother, and I want to step out of this narrative a little bit and talk briefly about the importance of having a partner in writing. It's really good. Writing is a solitary task, fundamentally. You sit and you do it by yourself. But it is really good to have somebody in your life who is also very interested in writing, or in your writing, if they're not themselves interested in writing. But somebody else in the arts would be great, I think. But somebody with whom you can share your stuff, who you can show your stuff to without embarrassment, and who you can talk to about the loneliness and the agony and the pain and the craft. And this is a solitary enough life without doing it completely on your own, and it's not necessary. My brother, who died about 10 years ago, really was that for me. And then, no kidding, about 3 weeks after he died, I met my wife, who was also a journalist, and we now have this just fabulous writing marriage together. We're both writers, we work together, showing each other our stuff, and I can't tell you how useful that is. So, if you can, kind of be on the lookout for somebody who you think is of like mind, of like heart, of like spirit, that you can work with, that you can share with. I can't stress that enough. Anyway, back to the narrative. I did this solitary thing in Berlin, and came back, promising my parents I was going to buy a suit and write a resume and get real. And a friend of my father's who does some writing, he said, "Look, what you want to do is you want to get a job that will pay you to write. Doesn't matter what you write, but just any job that pays you to put words together and see how they look." So I was looking for ad copywriting jobs. I was looking for public relations jobs, writing press releases. I was looking for anything, and I happened to get a job at a newspaper, at a little trade paper. It was called Energy User News, and it was a newspaper, a weekly newspaper for commercial and industrial energy managers. And we wrote about fluidized bed combustion boilers, and we wrote about heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. And we wrote about energy management systems. And we wrote really dry stuff. And I was lucky that everybody at this little paper, this was in New York City, also wanted to be writers and wanted to be journalists. And so we worked really hard, and it was the first time I had this real clicking relationship with other writers. I mean, I had this relationship with my brother, who was a visual artist, but now I had this clicking relationship with other writers. And one thing led to another. I got a job on a daily newspaper in Alaska, the Anchorage Times, which no longer exists. One of the few newspapers that's gone broke that I can say that was a paper that deserved to go broke. Anchorage is better off with one newspaper now. That was a really bad paper. And then from there, I got a job on the Asian Wall Street Journal, which was in Asia. The Wall Street Journal is Asian paper in Hong Kong, and then at the Wall Street Journal in New York, and then at the Atlanta Constitution. And then I was a staff reporter, which was great. And then my wife and I, we met, we fell in love, and we quit our jobs very quickly and opened a freelance bureau in Africa. And that's when we started freelancing, which is a whole kind of world unto itself. I don't know what kind of writers you are, what you aspire to, if you are poets, if you are fiction writers, if you are nonfiction writers, journalists. I can only speak about being a journalist, and I can tell you that being a journalist is so cool and so much fun. And I would think it is such good training for anybody who wants to do any kind of writing. I mean, dig this. If you're a reporter, even if you're a reporter at a bad paper, your job, by definition, is to go out and find the coolest stuff going on in town. The hippest people, the grooviest stuff, because that's what's news, right? So you're out there riding around with the police in their police cars, and you're going to fires, and you get to cross police lines, and you get to, I mean, sometimes you have to go to school board meetings and water board hearings, and those aren't particularly cool. On the other hand, it's important stuff, and you are, the reporter is always right there where stuff is happening, and you're going out and you're researching the most important stuff in town, right? So that's how you spend most of your day. Then you come back, and you get to write about it. You get to sit down and write, put those words together and see what sounds good. Then they print it. They put your name on it, and they pay you to do all that. To me, I can't imagine a better way to make a living. You get to run around and do the coolest stuff. You get to write about it. They print it. They put your name on it, and they pay you. It's just too good to be true, from my point of view. And the deadline pressure and the repetition of what you're doing completely boils out of you any fear of the blank screen, the blank page. I mean, you got to have that story. You got to have 700 inches about the car wreck in by 3:15 to make the 2-star edition. There's just no question about it. You got to do it. You don't do it, you get fired, and life, as you know, it comes to a screeching halt. So you do it, and you don't have any time to sit there and worry about, oh, am I good enough? How does this sound? How does that sound? You just got to do it. And news writing, if you have a good editor, and it's a decent paper, or if you're self-training, it's crisp, it's concise. You often have very little space to get a lot of information in, so you've got to teach yourself to build these very compact little tone poems, 700-word tone poems about whatever subject it is you're writing about. To that end, I want to talk about a book. A book that, it's a cliche when people talk about this book, but I am here to tell you it is the most important book to me as a writer. It's a book that I reread about every 3 or 4 months. It's not a book you keep open on your desk and use as a reference. It's a book you sit and read. It's a slim little book. I have it here. I don't know if you know it. It is called The Elements of Style. It's often referred to as Strunk and White. I want to tell you a little bit about this book and why this book is so important. I'll let you write that down. Strunk, S-T-R-U-N-K, and White, E.B. White is the E.B. White, the guy who wrote Charlotte's Web, and Stuart Little is the second writer, and William Strunk, who was a professor at Cornell. This book is called The Elements of Style for a reason. All of us have a writing style of our own. And we will all go through periods of trying other people's writing style. I think that's how you find your own style. I mean, there was a period where I was writing bad Hemingway. And then there was a period where I was writing bad Raymond Chandler. I had a bad Hunter Thompson period. You know, I had a bad Joan Didion period, and I think that's a good way to teach yourself to write. Of course, it goes without saying, you got to read if you want to write. And you read the stuff you like reading, read the stuff you would like to be writing, and see if you can write like that. Try it out. But what the Elements of Style is about is after you've tried that for a while, or even while you're trying that, there are rules to writing. And there are rules that can be broken. My brother used to try to beat this into my head when I would be in my bad Hunter Thompson period, for example, and it was just kind of all over the place. He would say, Dan, look, Picasso, ultimately, what he got to was that wacky stuff. You know, the guy playing the flute and his head is way out here on the end of the flute, and Cubism, and all this stuff that was so electrifying because it was so weird. He said, but Picasso spent years and years painting landscapes and still lifes, just to learn how to do lighting, to do form, to do shape, and there's a cautionary tale there for writers, because we all want to do our own thing and distinguish ourselves in our style, but the path to that is through the rules. Grammar and usage. There is one rule in particular that Meg and I just live by. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. But what I was going to say about the rules is, when one follows the rules, when you sit down and try to write a piece of writing, and you think only about, I'm going to follow the rules. I'm not going to end sentences with prepositions. I'm not going to split infinitives. You know, all that dreary grammar stuff, right? That you think, you know, real writers don't pay attention to. That's just for school kids. If you adhere to the rules, really adhere to the rules, what emerges is your style. I know that's kind of hard to believe. Style is within you. Each of us has a style, a beautiful style. And the way you get to that style is by following rules. And I know it seems odd, but if we were all to sit down and write, we say we're going to write about a car accident. I gave you all the facts about the car accident, and I said, okay, let's each of us write about this, and nobody break any of the rules. We would come out with stories that were completely different. Or if we were going to write a story about two people meeting and falling in love. And you weren't to break any of the rules. You weren't going to split infinitives. You weren't going to end sentences with a preposition. You were going to punctuate properly. You were going to do the possessive forms properly. Each of us would come out with a different style. That's what's so great about this book. This book, it's really thin, and it just reminds you about you know, words that are commonly misused. You know, don't break sentences in two. Do not join independent clauses by a comma. All this kind of stuff that seems like it's third grade grammar. We live by it, and we're doing okay as writers. There's one rule in particular that this book holds paramount, and so do I. And it goes like this. It's actually a paragraph in here. Vigorous writing is concise. A sentence should have no unnecessary words, and a paragraph no unnecessary sentences, for the same reason that a machine should have no unnecessary parts, or a painting no unnecessary lines. This does not mean that all good writing is terse and dry, but that every word you use tells. That, I think it's on page 22. I don't know if it's on page 22 of this edition, but it's on page 22 of the edition I usually read. It is the best imaginable rule, because when you follow that rule, what you end up writing is poetry. This book is full of phrases that commonly put flag into people's writing, and I'm sure you do it. Phrases like "the fact that," phrases that often can be struck out. And when you live by this rule that you're going to make your writing concise, and that every word that you put on the page has got to do work, your own style will emerge. It may be very verbose. You know, your style may be like William Faulkner, with sentences that go on for, 8 or 10 pages. Or you may find that you are a poet. You may find that you are a haiku poet, and writing extremely lean stuff. But I want you, when you're writing, I want you to look at every word on your page, look at every word in each sentence and say, is that word necessary? Is that word doing all the work that it could do? Or is there a word that I could put in there that would do more work, that would be richer? If you see two words together, if you see a word like, you see words like big house in there, well, would mansion be better? Or is that the wrong connotation? But you got to be thinking that way. Mansion would swap one word for two. It's a saving. We even talk about saving syllables. If there's a two-syllable word that can do the work of a three-syllable word, you use the two-syllable word. And then what you end up with, if you're always doing that, if you're always going through and saying, is every word doing the work, what you end up with is what I call the clippity-clop. Writing that just moves along like that. One of the things I'm very proud of in this book about the drug war, this book about the drug war is mostly a research and organizational task. I went and interviewed everybody who's had anything to do with drug policy for the last 30 years, and I went to all the presidential libraries and the Library of Congress and dug up just mountains of information, came back, organized it, and wrote it into a book. At the time, I was not very happy. When I handed it in, I was not very happy with the writing. I thought, this is a great piece of research. It's a wonderful piece of reporting. It's a stupendous job of organization. But really, the writing, it's not a great piece of literature. And yet, what I keep getting praised for in reviews and when people email me and people talk to me is people say, this book read so well. This book went so fast. And I think that's true because my wife and I, she edited and we did about 11 versions of this book. We were able to achieve a certain clippity-clop. And that clippity-clop comes from swapping two words for three, one word for two, three syllables for four, and likewise. You got to get good with your words. You got to build your vocabulary. The more words you have, the more words you can use. My wife and I keep dictionary. I don't know where you read. We read in bed. We have a little kid. By the time we get to sit and do our reading for the day, we're usually in bed at the end of the day, and we keep a dictionary by the bed because you find words all the time you don't know, and it's fun to look up words you don't know. We use the thesaurus a lot. I don't know if you are yet comfortable with the thesaurus. Some people seem to think that it's kind of cheating to go through a book to find a synonym. It's wonderful to go through a thesaurus. I urge you, though, never use a thesaurus without a dictionary also. If you use a thesaurus, if you're like, you come up with the angry, right? You've had the word angry twice already in your piece, and you want to come up with a synonym for angry. So you go to the let's say you I'll give you an example. I had used the word, I think, craven once too many times on a page. So I went to the thesaurus and I looked up the word venal. I looked up synonyms, and I found the word venal. Ooh, and venal sounded good, and the hi Marcia, the rhythm worked. Venal, it fit the sentence because that's really important. That it sounded good to your ear. But then I went to the dictionary and looked it up, and it turned out venal was the wrong word. It was close, but it was the wrong word. Venal actually means easily bought off. I thought venal just meant kind of evil. Turns out venal means easily bought off. It wasn't exactly the right word. If you use the thesaurus without the dictionary, you're going to screw yourself up. Because what writing is, to me, writing is psychological warfare. What you're trying to do when you sit down and write, whether it's a poem, a letter, a newspaper article, is you are thinking about something. You are thinking about the short story that's in your mind, or you're thinking about the school board meeting that you just attended, or you're thinking about a poem that's in your mind, or you're thinking about a mood that you want to convey. And you've got this thought in your head. And what you want to do is transport that way of thinking, that thought, whole meal into the head of your reader. You want your reader to feel exactly the way you do. Visual artists will probably tell you the same thing about what they do. But I know about writing. If you're writing a short story, if you're writing a love story, you are feeling tragic, yet somehow elated, and sympathetic, and yet furious. This kind of melange of emotions that you want to get across. And what you want to do is you want to make the reader think exactly that way, feel exactly that way. You want to manipulate their brain. And we do that with our words. And we do it with meaning and finding exactly the right word. This is what my wife Meg is so good at doing. She will go through my stuff and she'll circle words and put WC above it, word choice. And she'll say, is that exactly the right meaning? Because if it's not, and if you just, if you're moving the reader along like this, and you come to a word that's not quite right, you get them slightly off track, and you might never get them back. People are busy these days. People don't want to read. People stop reading all the time. They will tell you in a newspaper that nobody ever reads past the 5th inch of a story. So if you write a 40-inch story, 35 inches of that are going to be wasted because nobody is going to read past the 5th inch. Nobody's got the time, nobody's got the interest. So what we try to do in newspapers is make every paragraph so goddamn good that you can't stop reading. So that the reader is standing there working the newspaper like a bellows, looking for the jump, looking for the continuation of the story, because they can't stop reading until they hit the bottom. And you got to be thinking that way all the time, no matter what you're writing. If you're writing a short story, a book, a letter, a newspaper article, as soon as you give the reader an excuse to put it down, they'll do it. So word choice is crucial. If I had used that word venal in that story that I was writing, it would have knocked the meaning of the story off a little bit. It wouldn't have quite fit. The people who knew the word would say venal, easily bought off, and they would have been slightly confused. It would have created the wrong mood, and I would have blown it. I would not have gotten my mindset and my thinking into the reader's head. The other thing about word choice, is, besides meaning, is rhythm. Rhythm is crucial. And the way you develop rhythm, the way you develop an ear for what you've written, is to read it aloud and see how it sounds. I mean, I could go through my book and find sentences that just work great rhythmically, and other sentences that just suck rhythmically, just clunk. And a sentence that has the meaning right and the rhythm wrong will stop a reader just as much as a sentence that, has the meaning wrong and the rhythm right. And they may not stop, but you'll start to lose them. And holding the reader to the very end is the trick, because if they stop reading, everything you've written after there is completely wasted. You may as well have been out shooting hoops. They got to read it. People have to. It's not like looking at a painting. People can walk through a museum and go like this and take in a painting and go on. Now, artists like people to stop and study it and spend a lot of time with it, but you can sometimes get it just by glancing and and moving on, especially if it's big. But with writing, they got to be thinking about it. They got to be concentrating on it. They've got to get to the end, or your work is wasted. There will be people who say that writing isn't fun. You've probably heard, somebody says that they've been writing all day, and say, well, do you just feel awful? Do you just feel miserable? And they say no. And I say, well, then you're not doing it right. I'm not sure that's really true. I'm actually in the writing phase now of an article that I'm doing. I did a bunch of research last week, and today I really started writing. And I did what we all do when we've got to do something to write. I cleaned my desk, and I cleaned up the whole office, and I made a bunch of phone calls, and I got my email, and I read the whole Missoulian cover to cover, and got a cup of coffee, and walked around, and when I had done absolutely everything I could do, then I sat down to write, and I looked at the screen for a long time, and I tried some sentences, and they were no good, and and then I kind of went to the middle of the story and did that. Sometimes, I kind of have to get my lead down before I'm really going, but sometimes you have a thought in your head that is going to be in there, and it's good to go, way down on the screen and write that down. I mean, if you've got it in your head and you can get it on the screen, do it. Some people work that way. Other people are more like me, that until the top is there, they can't. I kind of work that way. Write the top, write the next sentences, and go on. But God, I loved it. I just loved it today. Today was so much fun. I mean, I sat down to work, and from the time I sat down to work till lunchtime, which was really about 2.5 hours, it was like 15 minutes. My wife came in and, said hi, and I looked up like, whoa, what are you doing here? It's only 9 o'clock in the morning. Whoa, noon. And then the afternoon went just as fast. There's a certain amount of pain involved, especially when it's not going well, but it's really delightful. It's really fun. And it gets to be more fun the better you get at it and the more confident you get at it. One thing that really boosts confidence is getting printed. And there are a lot of venues to getting printed. I don't know how many of you have ever seen your name in typeface in a book or a newspaper or a magazine or a newsletter. It really will knock you for a banger the first time you see it. It will change the way you think about yourself as a writer. So I encourage, writing for school papers, writing for the yearbook, writing for a newsletter, writing for the church paper, writing for anybody who will print what you write and put your name on it. It's kind of a crucial step in learning to think of oneself as a writer and gaining the confidence in oneself as a writer to enjoy it. And maybe what I'll do is stop here. Does anybody have, I guess we're going to take a break and then look at your writing. Does anybody have any particular questions or comments or anything that we want to talk about right now?
I'm really curious about journalism today. Do you feel like we are getting the truth? Do you think what we read is the truth, or is it a filtered truth? Or is it a controlled or manipulated truth?
The big problem with journalism, for me, is this business about trying to be objective. I don't know if you've come across this concept, that modern journalism is supposed to be objective. What objectivity is supposed to mean is that you have no opinion about the subject and you're just kind of writing down what's the truth. But there is no such thing as objectivity, because one uses their subjective self in deciding what to write about, in deciding who to talk to. We're talking about journalism now. Journalists make decisions all the time. What is worth writing about? Poor people in this country are really not worth writing about to most journalists, right? They are making a subjective judgment that the poor are not worth writing about. So we don't read much about the poor. And yet we are told that our journalism is quote-unquote objective. But of course it is subjective. Objectivity comes from a particular era in American journalism. Back in the 19th century, newspapers were owned by political parties, by factions of political parties, by all kinds of different groups, and every city had lots and lots of newspapers, and everybody was putting out their own paper for little niches and putting their own spin on the news. And what you did was you read as many newspapers as you felt like reading, and you divined some kind of understanding of what's going on from that. Newspapers then became a business, and the telegraph came about, which meant that we were going to be writing about one place for readers in another place. And so suddenly it became important to have newspapers appeal to as many people as possible. You wanted lots and lots of readers so you could sell lots and lots of ads and make money doing it. And so this idea of objectivity came about, and we still are suffering under this idea of objectivity. The Missoulian operates on a principle of objectivity. The New York Times, the Washington Post, NBC News, CNN, they pretend that they have no opinion about this, that they have no judgment about what they're reporting on, and it's total crap, because they are making decisions all the time about what they write about and how they write about it. What they are doing instead is they are offering us middle of the road. They are saying we are neither left nor right. We are neither radical nor reactionary, neither liberal nor conservative. We're the middle of the road. But I argue that the middle of the road is as distinct a political position as the left or the right. And so that what they're doing is giving us a distinct political position, the middle of the road, which is not my position. So I am very aware that they are different and off. They're giving us this position, this very distinct political position, and pretending that they're not. And I think that's very destructive. And that also comes from editors not trusting reporters. I think the role of a journalist is to go out and find out what's going on and then come back and write about it. Now, I don't think journalists should be filtering what they go out and see through their preconceived opinions. You know, if somebody is pro-life and is a reporter, I don't think they should be going out and spinning the story and spinning their research to comply with their pro-life views. But I do think that if a reporter is sent out to do a story, say, on whether the Missoula County should have a jail, there's controversy about the jail, which we're having right now, I think there's a difference between going out and talking to all the proponents of the jail and all the opponents of the jail and writing down what they say and putting it in the paper, which to me is just stenography, which is all the Missoulian does, which is all most newspapers do. It's just stenography. I think there's a difference between that and finding out, do we need a jail? Is the jail a good thing? Looking at the number of prisoners, what the prisoners are in for, why the prisoners are in for those sorts of things, what kind of crime is going, what kind of offenses are going up, what's happening to sentences, doing some legwork, doing some research, going into the documents, finding out what is really going on, and writing about it for the reader. Reporters aren't usually allowed to do that. They're not allowed to come back and say, Missoula County doesn't need a new jail. What Missoula County needs is to reformulate sentencing so that we are not locking up nonviolent drug offenders and turning violent criminals out. That kind of thing. I mean, journalists wouldn't necessarily say Missoula County doesn't need a new jail, but good journalism, I think, would come back and say, if the reporter went out and found out that the Missoula County jail was not necessary, but in fact there was a problem with sentencing, to come back and write a story that says Missoula's perceived jail crisis is more a matter of sentencing than it is of jail spaces, right? That's a clear sentence, and then back it up. I would certainly be fair. I would certainly give the opponents of this point of view, all kinds of opportunity to discuss it. The reporters should be open to their points of view, should hear it, should not close it off. But after doing all the research, reporters should be allowed to write what they believe the truth is. Because this is what we hire reporters to do. We can't all go out and find out about every issue for ourselves. We can't all fix our own car. We can't all do our own appendectomies. We can't all install our own telephones. We hire people to do this stuff for us. That's what a complex society is. And one of the things we hire done for us is we hire people to go out and find out what the hell is going on and write it down in the newspaper so that we can make intelligent judgments as voters. Right? Well, we don't trust reporters to do that. Instead, we send them out like secretaries and say, go find out what they say and go find out what they say. Put it in the paper. So you open the paper and these people say this and these people say that and these people say this and these people say that. And the reader says, well, what the hell's going on? What's the truth? I know what the two sides are saying, but what's the reality here? So that to me is the problem with mainstream journalism. I think the internet and websites is really exciting because now there's way, way, way more voices. I'm doing a piece now for Wired magazine about the San Jose Mercury News story about the CIA and crack. I don't know if you've heard about this. San Jose Mercury News ran some stories back in August connecting the CIA to crack dealing in South Central Los Angeles in the 80s. And the mainstream papers, the New York Times, the LA Times, and the Washington Post, either ignored it or actively discredited the story. And yet, the story is everywhere. There's going to be congressional hearings because of it. There's been huge demonstrations because of it. Because of the internet, and because of email, and because of websites, this story got out and about, and the country is basically saying to the New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times, which used to have the authority to decide what is and isn't news, the country is saying to these papers, look, we don't care what you think. We say this is news. Now that to me is very exciting, because way too much power has been vested in the hands of large media corporations that have been deciding for us what to think. And now that authority is being decentralized, and it's way cool. You might even think of yourselves as potential writers for the net, because there's all kinds of great journalism being done online. Never gets printed in paper, but it's hugely important and very exciting. And I think those opportunities are just going to get bigger and greater. And my wife really likes working by email and by modem, because she says there's no bullshit about, women in newsrooms get hit on, and and women in meetings, news meetings, get kind of shouted down by the men, and black folks will tell you the same thing, that, minority folks in newsrooms, that, there's all this politics about what you look like and who you are, and when you're a cyborg, when you're a name on a screen, nobody knows what you look like, who you are. They've just got to take you entirely on the strength of your ideas and the strength of your writing. It's a brave new world of journalism, one that did not exist certainly when I started, or it didn't exist when I ended my newspaper career. It's really new and very exciting. A long answer to a short question. About the technology, just briefly. I don't know if you all work on computers, or if you work on typewriters, or if you work by pen and ink. The technology is great. I make use of it. I'm a journalist. I make use of it. If you're a poet or a fiction writer, maybe it's not as useful, but there's an awful lot out there online, and research material, other people's writing, other writers, that you can share your thoughts and your fears and your writing with. When we started, my first job, we had these kind of steam-operated computers that, it was the first computers I'd ever seen, and when I think back on them, they were like things from the Crimean War. I mean, these enormous boxes with little tiny gray screens, and they crashed all the time. And when I was at the Asian Wall Street Journal, in Singapore in 1983. I mean, that may seem like a long time ago to you. It seems like last week to me. I mean, it's a very short time ago. And I was writing my stories on a typewriter and handing it to a Malay telex operator who would punch it out on a telex machine. She spoke no English. She just went letter by letter. And this is how I was communicating with the office in Hong Kong. When Meg and I were in Africa, we had this little Radio Shack Tandy, it was called a Trash 80, just this little plastic, quasi-computer with an 8-line liquid crystal screen, slow as molasses, no hard disk, this 300 baud modem, and it was, we brought that to Africa, and it was like we had come down from another planet, Buck Rogers. But when we wanted to communicate with the United States, it was either shouting into a telephone or using a telex machine, which is this enormous thing. It's 19th century technology. It's an enormous machine where you punch, you go thump, 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 these big heavy keys, and you punch this long paper tape full of holes. And then you feed the paper tape through a little ticker, and it goes tick, 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 tick. And at the other end, that tape types it on a telex machine, thump, 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 thump. I mean, it really was, Stone Age. And, you'd have this paper tape running along the floor, and it would get caught on a chair and break, and you'd have to get in there and say, stop, stop, fixing tape. And it was, and it was all capital letters, and just a hoot. When we did radio from Africa, we'd go out and record analog sound, then come back, and we had 2 tape recorders, and we'd sit and try to edit the tape, edit sound, edit the background sound, and then our voices in, just by using the pause buttons. And then when it came time to send it back to the BBC or NPR, who we were working for, we'd take the whole goddamn phone apart and have these wires with alligator clips and trying to find the right leads and sending it. And so our dispatches would come sounding like they were coming from the dark side of the moon, Zimbabwe, that kind of thing. It's ridiculous. Now, reporters go out with digital tape, a little tiny digital Sony Walkman. They go out, they gather all their sound, they come back, they load the digital tape onto their PowerBook, right? They do all their editing on the computer screen. Then they just send the file of all the sound over the internet as an attached file to an email, and it ends up at NPR in DC sounding absolutely as clear and perfect as though you were standing right there. That's why radio sounds so good now. And we've only been back from Africa for 7 years. I mean, and nobody was even thinking about things like that 7 years ago. The technology is really cool, and you can buy it cheap if you're willing to be like 1 or 1.5 generations back. There's a rule of thumb that the computer you want always costs $3,500. And what you get for $3,500 changes over time. But the computer you want always costs $3,500. Well, you can get a great computer for a lot less. You can get a computer now for less than $1,000. I mean, the computer I work on now I bought when I started this drug book, which was 3 years ago. It was the top-of-the-line Macintosh PowerBook. I paid, I don't know, $2,400 for it, plus a modem, da-da-da-da-da. It was, you know, state-of-the-art. And it still is a fabulous computer. I see them advertised online now for $700. It's like, you know, people are using them to make artificial reefs and stuff. They're worthless. So I think, you know, if you can scratch up a little bit of money and accustom yourself to the technology, the research and writing opportunities are vast. Yeah, finally, I have.
You gave us what a journalist is. So what's a story? You're talking about like objectivity and subjectivity and stuff like that. But what is a story out there? When you see something, what makes it a story?
That's a good question. There's a number of things that make a story a story. You know, it's got to be something new, and if not new, something that people don't already know about. So, I mean, if you come up with information about, you know, something important that happened in Montana 30 years ago, but nobody knows about it, you know, you can make that new. Sellable. I hate to say it. You know, journalists don't work in a vacuum. Freelance journalists don't work in a vacuum. It has to be something you can sell. Offbeatness sells. Meg and I, when we came back from Africa, we moved here to Missoula and we started freelancing, and we were covering this region on a freelance basis for the LA Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Chicago Tribune, the Dallas Times-Herald, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, San Francisco Examiner, and we were also trying to generate magazine stories. And what we would do is if we wanted to do a magazine story, say about Butte, we did a big Smithsonian piece about Butte, we would go and do a newspaper story, try to find a newspaper story to do about Butte, so that we could then use that research to write the proposal for the magazine story. But we would try to find stories. You know, we kind of knew the cachet that Montana had. This is kind of when A River Runs Through It was coming out, and everybody's thinking about Montana, how cool Montana is. Now, of course, we all know the truth. But back then, everybody thought Montana was just the coolest place in the world, and there was kind of a hunger for stories. And we would try to write, you know, serious stuff about Indian politics and environment politics, and every now and then we would sell it. The biggest story we ever got, one that we sold this story to about 15 papers around the country, was about people listening to police scanners to hear where there was a dead deer, and then going out and picking it up so they could eat it. Okay? And Meg wrote this story because people listen on the scanner, because deer, when they get hit, if the sheriffs get there quickly enough, they're picked up and they're brought to a food bank and they're put through the grinder and they're distributed as hamburger, you know, provided the deer is freshly dead. And so the sheriff's office, when they would get a report, they would put it on the scanner. You know, that there's a deer dead just down at, you know, milepost 75 on Highway 2. And people would listen on that and zoom out there and try to get there before the sheriff got there. And Meg wrote a story that I remember the lead very clearly. She said, "How tough are things in Montana? This tough. The state and its people are fighting over roadkill." And that story went everywhere. Now, she did this in an afternoon. I mean, I think we probably made, I don't know, $2,500 off that story. I mean, we made a lot of money off that story. You know, it was kind of an offhand little offbeat thing. Other stories we would work weeks on and, you know, maybe sell it twice, you know, for $150 a pop. You know, if a plane crashes, that's a story, certainly. You know, obvious news you can find. I encourage reporters. I have a friend who used to work at the Independent, used to be here in Missoula. Her name is Kristen Bloomer, and she's now working as a reporter at the Rutland Herald and doing very well. And she asked me that same question when she got out there, because she'd never been a daily newspaper reporter. And I encouraged her to develop a point of view. I think one of the big tragedies about journalists now, going back to this objectivity thing, is journalists have taught themselves not to have a point of view, not to be informed, not to have a distinct, clear political point of view. And I don't think as I said before, I don't think you should be imposing your political agenda on every story you do, and I don't think you should have made up your mind about the story before you set out. But I think a point of view is really important. What I encouraged Kristen to do was to educate herself about poverty in Vermont. Because poverty in Vermont is kind of swept under the rug. Vermont's a tourist state. It's a Ben and Jerry's state. It has this very pretty picture postcard image of itself. It's got these little clean industries and whatnot. But there are a lot of people really hurting in Vermont, and they don't get any attention. And so I really encouraged Kristen to start reading The Nation, start reading publications that cover these issues, cover labor issues, and to start thinking about poor people. And she has since developed this poverty beat in the Rutland Herald that is really popular. She's doing great work. She's now starting to send out applications to the Boston Globe and the San Jose Mercury News and the St. Pete Times and bigger papers. And she said it really changed how she thought about her job. She felt suddenly that she was doing this for a reason. I think journalists need to be really well informed and passionate about how they think the world is and how they think the world should be. And that's why we do this. Ultimately, we do this to change the world, to make the world a better place. This is a sacred calling, I think, to be a journalist. It's a very special role in society. And I think journalists owe it to their readers, owe it to the public to be very well informed and care about things. And I think that makes you a good journalist. So what do you all write? What do you write? Yeah. So why are you here tonight?
Because we had to go to a cultural event for our class.
Do you like to write?
About certain things.
Like what?
Things that I'm interested in, things that I like to do.
And when you write about it, like how do you like to write? Do you like to write about exactly what you do, or do you like to kind of build a story of somebody doing that kind of thing, or
What I like to do.
is just you doing it, telling about the stuff that you do? That's a great way to get going. Everybody's first novel is always about themselves. Usually it's about themselves as a kid. Dee McNamery is going to come and talk to you all. And her first novel, that is a wonderful place to start. The first rule of writing is to write about stuff you know about. Later on you might be able to write science fiction, but for the moment, write about what you know about. And you're young, and you probably haven't been to war, and you probably haven't, climbed Mount Everest, and you probably haven't flown a jet plane, and so you shouldn't write about those things. But you have done a lot that is worth writing about, and you've certainly felt a lot that is worth writing about. You've experienced a lot that is worth writing about. And writing about yourself, whether explicitly as a memoir or as a roman à clef, writing a piece of fiction in which the main character or a character in there is you, and the other characters are people you know, that's a wonderful thing to do. I think it's a great way to train oneself to write. You kind of can't avoid it, and I guess what I'm saying is don't feel bad about doing it, because a lot of people feel like, oh, I don't write about anything interesting, or I don't have anything interesting to write about, But if your parents are divorced, if you've changed schools, if you did something cool in the summer, if you've broken up with a girlfriend or a boyfriend, if you've tried drugs, if you've been in a car wreck, if you've been on a really great trip, if you've been on a really great hike, there's all kinds of stuff happens in your life that is really interesting. And it's worth thinking about it. One of the tricks they talk about is get yourself a little tiny notebook in the Safeway for 39 cents and a pen and carry it around all the time. I'm not doing it now. I kind of try to have a notebook all the time, because stuff is going to occur to you, or stuff is going to happen to you, or you're going to look across the parking lot and you're going to see a woman, dragging her 4-year-old in to get a shot, right? And there's going to be this great dialogue going on, and you you'll say, well, that's kind of a cool scene. I'm going to write that down. I want to remember that. And what did she say there? And you get a lot of great material that way. And it's fun. Once you're doing that, you're kind of a spy. You drive your parents. If you're sitting at the dinner table and you're writing down everything they're saying and, you're following your parents around and, writing it all down, I guarantee you can get under their skin doing that. And, you will come up with amazing stuff. Stuff that to you seems mundane and annoying, to me would seem, whoa, there's pathos there. These people are wacky. I guarantee it, because all families are screwed up beyond measure. And so if you just, and each in its own way, and so if you just kind of record kind of the politics and dynamics of what's going on in your own family, you'll have a great little piece of writing. I promise you that. And if you really capture it, and if you really make the reader, as I said before, really make the reader feel about it the way you feel about it, I guarantee you will capture people's attention. So that could be a great place to start.
How do you catalog and keep track of all those little clips?
Well, a computer helps. A computer really helps, because then you can keyword search. I have all kinds of files and folders inside my computer, and if I say, yeah, I had something about a vase full of roses falling off a table. Where the hell is that? I can punch in roses, vase, and up it comes. Otherwise, if you don't want to do that, and not everybody can, and not everybody wants to do that, filing cabinet. I have a paper filing cabinet, and the thing Fiction Notes Dan, it's called, and I take it out every now and then and look through it, and stuff that I've forgotten about. Little things that I tore out of a paper, or a little thing that I thought of, and I save all that stuff, because it all, you're a ways away from thinking about your taxes, but when you're a writer, you can deduct every goddamn thing you do, because it's all grist. You go to the movies, oh yeah, I had to go see that movie because I'm checking out the writing. Take a trip anywhere, eat out anytime. Everything you do is deductible when you're a writer. Another great thing about being a writer is if you can make a living at it, you can live wherever you want. And that probably hasn't occurred to you, but it will become an issue when you are out of school and working. You may want to live in Kalispell, where you can ski a lot. Or you may want to live in New York City, where you can go to shows and hear music. Or you may want to live out in the desert. Not everybody can do that. Most people can't live wherever they want to. Most people have to live where their job is. But when you're a writer, provided you can make a living at it, you can live wherever you want, being a writer. I should also say that not everybody who is a writer writes all the time and makes a living at it. A lot of people do beautiful writing, are extremely fulfilled by their writing, and hold down jobs. And you've heard all the stories about how, Joseph Conrad was a postal clerk or something when he wrote Lord Jim, and all these amazing stories about people who held down jobs and also did, amazing writing. But I sure do like the self-employed freelance writer's life a lot, and I encourage you to strive in that direction, because it's a truth. What do you write? Mm-hmm.
Just trying out lots of different stuff right
Great poetry and nonfiction and fiction. Do you like it when you read it? Do you like it? You go back and you read it and you say,
now.
pretty good. And do you keep it in? Great. Do you write? For fun? Letters is another great way to do it, because it's sometimes hard to write without being able to envision who's going to read it. If you've got a friend or a relative who lives far away, or even somebody who lives in town, they will deliver mail in town. Letters can be great ways to write about what's in your heart, what's happening to you, what you're thinking. And it's kind of painless, because you think, well, I'm not really sitting down to write. I'm not sitting down to write a short story. I'm not sitting down to write a poem. I'm writing a letter to my cousin, or I'm writing a letter to my pal. And keep a copy, either on the disk or carbon, or copy it over by hand. By God, if you write by hand, or put a piece of carbon paper under your pen. letters can be a great way to kind of break through and get yourself to do the writing that you want to do.
How do you get a job as a writer?
That's a very good question. If you want to get a job as a journalist, I think being willing to go anywhere is really crucial. So that, and there's a magazine called Editor and Publisher that is the magazine of the newspaper business. And there are classifieds in there. That's how I got my job at the Asian Wall Street Journal, was answering the classified. And if there's a job in there in Decatur, Alabama, or Hobbs, New Mexico, or Grand Forks, North Dakota, or someplace you don't want to go and spend time, you take the job anyway. And you work as hard as you can while you're there to be so good that you can gather up really good clips and get the hell out of there in a year or 18 months. That's how you get a job. Broaden your idea of what you'll do. I think my father's friend's advice about getting any job that'll let you put words together, I think that's good advice. And be thinking about the next thing all the time. Be thinking about where you're going. I think one of the problems with the Missoulian is that the reporters have been here too long. A paper of this size, the reporters should all be 24-year-old fireballs who are just dying to get to the Spokesman Review so they can get to the Seattle Times, so they can get to the San Francisco Examiner, so they can get to the LA Times. And that's the kind of reporter that should be a paper this size. Instead, they got 45-year-old people in there who at 5 o'clock go pick up their kids at daycare, and they don't have the fire in the belly. They like living in Missoula, they like skiing and riding their bikes. And I guess it provides a good job for some nice people in town. I can't begrudge them that. But young people, I think, stay single and go anywhere and work your ass off. Work 20 hours a day. And just be really good, Turn out great stuff. Read Strunk and write concisely, follow the rules, have a point of view, bring something to your stories that other people aren't bringing, be informed, make interesting allusions, write stuff that sets you apart, and you'll get a better job. Do the same thing at the next paper, and you'll get a better job. And, keep doing that until you find yourself working under a boss who you really think can teach you something. There's a lot of real nitwits out there running newspapers, people who can't teach you a damn thing. On those jobs, all you can do is write a lot of words, get a lot of different kinds of experience, and get out. But every now and then you come across somebody, even in a little tiny paper, who's just great, who can really teach you a lot about the craft. And that's a person you stay with, and you suck them dry. You just attach yourself to that person and don't let go until you really feel like you can spread your wings and fly out of the nest. Find a mentor.
Thanks, Dan. This
Thank
was
you all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.
If you'd like to go ahead and stay for some cookies and treats and have an opportunity to visit with Dan, you're welcome to. And I invite you to come back next week and the following weeks on Tuesday night, 7:30. They will be here at the library, and except for the 12th on at Bojangles. And we want to hear your words. We want to hear your writing. Whether it's a portion of a short story, an exciting scene, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, whatever, an essay, an editorial piece, something from you. That's what this series is about too. Not only to connect you with these wonderful writers in our town, but also to hear your voices, what you have to say. So I'd encourage you to come. And next week we'll have Dick and Cheryl, and that will be a wonderful experience. Thanks a lot, Dick, for coming tonight. And Saturday, we'll have a workshop here, 1 to 3. Bring your writing, bring your ideas, and come share with us. So So thank you so much, Dan. I got it.
It was
Yeah. Oh my God.
In fact, I turned it up. I think right now it's on 2. And when I had it on,
Hi there.
automatic, it
Hi,
wanted to be
Dick.
darker. It just makes it really dark. So the button for
So did you get your house painted?
maybe bring it down a little.
Almost done today.
Really?
It's just like 10% of the house. It's just the front.
Really?
Oh, it's been, I got 200 hours. I just really professional hours.
Do you want to give me some bongos? Get them started?
Are we about to start?
Yeah. All right. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. This is the second in our series of young adult writers series events at the library that we have where we introduce you and bring together you writers, you high school writers, and young writers with some of the writers in our community. And Missoula is so blessed with so many wonderful people who are doing music and art and drama and writing and poetry and videos and filming that it's really kind of fun to meet some of those people. And so that was kind of the focus of our series, is to give you an opportunity to meet some of these neat people. Tonight, I'd like to thank Beth of Java Jungle for letting us take over her space. Beth just bought the business this summer, and it's just been a great addition to the library to be able to come down and have a place to have a cup of coffee and do some reading and enjoy the library. I really want to thank you, Beth, for letting us be here tonight. I'm sorry that the space is a little tight, but hopefully you can all see and all hear. And midway through, I do have some treats from Casa Pablo's, and we'll try and set them up at strategic places where you can get some treats. And I'd like to thank Casa Pablo's for providing the food tonight. That was their contribution for the evening. I'd also like to thank the Missoula Writing Collaborative and the Friends of the Library for sponsoring tonight's event and sponsoring this series and bringing us all together. Part of the focus of this series is not only to hear people like Cheryl and Dick perform their work, to make their music, but it's also to hear your voices. I think it's really, really important that we as a community hear all members of our community. And I really want this series to be a medium for that, a forum for that, to hear your voices, hear your writing. And so I'd encourage you, I'd really like to hear your writing tonight. We're going to be doing a workshop on the 16th of November here at the library, a writer's workshop. And I want to thank Karen for being with that last Saturday, and Cheryl and Dick for participating, and Nate and Mike, Tom, for being there, and Allie too, who's not here tonight. All right, our two guests tonight, I am very pleased to have returned to our series. They opened our series last spring. Cheryl Nothey is a published and well-noted Missoula poet. She grew up on a farm in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and on the credits on her book, she says that she spent her summers in southern Minnesota farmland, racing cars with her father, reading books and dreaming of horses. After high school, she traveled through Europe and Greece and worked as a mime. Books were always the stable ground in a very wiggly world. In 1976, she did, however, win the American Academy of Poetry Award at the University of Minnesota. In 1983, she won a Loft McKnight Award, which helped her to stay sane between waiting on tables. She is working on keeping her feet on the ground and her head in the clouds. The Descent of Heaven Over the Lake is her first book, which she published after she returned from Europe, right? And then before you went to New York City to teach in the schools as a poet in residence for the New York City schools. At that time, she also collaborated with another author and wrote a book on poetry, and has since moved to Missoula in 1986, and collaborated with many musicians and writers in the community, and has just recently released a CD called Mount Jumbo Love Cycle, which celebrates the seasons and the beauty of Mount Jumbo. Dick Ostheimer is a native of Westchester, Pennsylvania. I lost my notes. Is that true, Westchester?
It's true.
Oh, yeah.
That's actually true.
It's amazing what the mind will remember. And then moved to St. Ignatius at the age of 10, where he started performing with friends professionally as a musician at the age of 13. Since then, he has been a noted, well-known musician in Missoula, collaborating with many people to make music. He has been with Cheryl in collaborating on the Mount Jumbo Love Cycle, and also has just recently received the Missoula Cultural Council's award for a series of videos, which Dick will tell us about. So, I am very pleased to have Dick Ostheimer and Cheryl Nothy join us tonight. Thank you.
It's really nice to see everybody in this kind of bad weather. It's great when people come out for poetry in spite of everything. I just want to ask you before we start, you know, this is a interactive kind of thing, and so I'll read some poems and then Dick will make his own wonderful kind of music behind them. Then we'll have a break and there's Doritos and salsa, and then we'll have readers come up and read their stuff. Now this is a chance to read in public, to be on MCAT, and I bet you can get all kinds of extra credit for being a poet on TV. So I would like to ask for a show of hands. How many people are planning to read or are halfway thinking about reading? If you don't want to raise your hand, let's see, 1, 2, just a couple, huh? Okay, well, maybe you can build up your courage as we go, and you can even improvise something if you didn't bring something. So Dick and I have been working together for a few years, and we get together and I read him the poems and he thinks about what he would do with them musically, and that's how we do it. So I'm going to start, and the first poem I'm going to read is called Anna Margaret. This poem is about my grandmother who died in childbirth when she was 30 years old, having her 8th baby, which seems like so barbaric in the 90s to think that that kind of thing happened like 2 generations ago, but it did, and I never knew her, and it affected my life that I never had a grandma because her religion and her poverty prevented her from stopping the amount of babies that she was having with no control. So, this poem is called Anna Margaret. It's dedicated to my grandmother. Little grandmother tilts her head at me from a photograph and smiles like Judy Garland. I look like my mother would have looked had she had a happy life. I look like no one that came before me. They died early, quick souls, who could not withstand the hardship history delivers. Childbirth, again and again, until the body gives out at 30, at 31. Hot potatoes held in the hand instead of mittens. Carried to school in the snow and eaten for lunch. Polka dot maternity blouse worn 7 times in 10 years. Dust storms, tornadoes, the husband tipping a bottle of whiskey to his mouth. I never knew her. She raises wet clothing to hang on the line. One of her arms is a broken, unhealed bone. Inside of her, another of my uncles has begun to swim. The next poem that I'm going to read is about the ghost that we inherited with our house when we bought it. Here in Missoula, we didn't notice we had a ghost until the people that owned the house previously called and asked if she was bothering us. I said, no ghost, no problem. We went outside, we came back, all the screens were latched from the inside. She started turning lights on at night. The dogs were particularly bothered by her. Then she took my wallpaper and papered her old medicine chest in the shed with it. So we had a very active relationship with her for a couple of years. And this poem is dedicated to my ghost, Jessie Thompson. We had a ghost in the house for a few years, turning on the lights and exciting the dogs. In a phone call from the old owner, we were able to learn her name. She lived in this house for a lifetime, fell in the hallway, and died. When the old owners argued, she slammed the bedroom door, dropped drawers of silverware, they said, tossed brooms, made noises from the bottom of the stairs. They sold the house, divorced, and moved away. Our dogs jumped up, barking at night. The porch light came on and striped our bed. My husband got up and stood in the hallway. "Are you lonely?" he asked her. "Are you afraid?" She held very still when we talked to her, held the breath of the house in her mouth. After a while, even the dogs seemed to like her. My husband said, "She's afraid of the dark." We still have her kitchen clock, her ironing board, and its linen slipcover. And when I press our shirts, the steam has an old and gentle air. Don't be afraid. Funny when she locked us out, hooking screen doors from the inside. When I put botanical wallpaper in the kitchen, we found her old medicine chest in the shed, lined with my new wallpaper. Don't be afraid. Grandmother breathes. Lights flicker. She informs us of the other world, the alley between. You can always lead from any one dream to the secret thought, and thus ghosts work. We aren't afraid. Come back. We miss you. I would like to just stop for a minute to tell you about this publication. I just got a poem published in this Wordsmith collection, and they're looking for people of all ages. And they have a contest kind of thing in the back for short stories, young writer publications. And he has advertisements all over town, and his address is in here. And I really recommend, if you write poetry, to send your poems in and get them published. It's always good to start early. Okay? The next poem takes place on the Pas Cimaroy in Idaho. I was working there doing one-room schoolhouses for a winter. And, well, I won't say any more, I'll just read it. Sawtooth Range, Possimeroy Valley. Over the sound of the river, the whispering of the parents, the bawling of cows from the horizon, over a high mountain desert red as Mars, over the conversation of the living, and this murmuring on the edge of the 20th century. I lie on a cot in a log cabin looking out a window onto the dark extension with its rare and scattered lights, glimmering from long dead stars and far mercury vapor lamps. My grandmother died in childbirth at 30. I feel her struggle against the denial of time in my cells. I feel the goddess Nut stretching to reach the milk star. I feel the desire of things to break from their shape. Walking along a dirt road in the Sawtooth Mountains, I am afraid, as always, of the indefinite object. I make the echoing ee-yah of the Thai pig-calling women. Frightening fright. No wildcat, no mad skunk, no bear, no badger, wolf, wolverine, no wild dog. But a blue truck approaches. Two bearded men, rifles hanging in the gun rack. I stand beside the road clutching a rock, squinting into the sun, waiting for these men to determine history. I always ask the children to write about animals. But after a few weeks in this area, I stop asking. I am tired of stories of cruelty, neglect, and murder. Does the animal have feelings? I ask my classes. Does the animal have a soul? But these children here do not know soul. I ask the rancher's wife why the herd of cows I hear from far on the horizon has been bawling so sadly all week. They're being weaned from their calves, she tells me. They sound sad, I say. Yes, she says. They seem to feel sorrow. The wild grasses here, they say, used to grow high as a horse's belly. All the wild grass gone. The next poem is called Kundalini, and in yoga and in some Eastern religions there's this idea about this snake that's in your spine that's asleep, and when you come to some kind of spiritual knowledge, this snake uncurls and opens up your spine and it gives you all of this energy and magic, and so that's who Kundalini is the major part of this poem. Last night as we lay curled together in that place, reverie, we felt a current of electricity pass between us. Did you feel that? I asked. Yes, he said. I sure did. It came from you, I told him. It moved up my spine. No, he said, it came from you and went into my thighs. Kundalini? I wondered. Snake in spine uncurling at last? I lay awake and imagined the stars through the ceiling. The little dog crept up to sleep beside me. Honey, I whispered, I think this is a good sign. But he was already dreaming, said, oh, oh, oh. He had gone far ahead of me into that dark country. Cat call. Last night, he tells me, I called out in my sleep for Steve. You groaned, he said, and it woke me. A cat screamed out back. You sounded surprised, he says. When you said it, the dogs became excited. He got up and closed the window. Who is this guy? He asks at breakfast. At my hair, in the mirror, I wonder. And what about that cat? Calling from Mount Jumbo toward our house. There was a name in my mouth from that other life. What was I going to tell Steve when my husband interrupted? Eyes of darkness fill like pools when I lie down. A stranger comes out of me. I call him back. I cannot open this window. As you can tell, the poems have moved from death and ghosts to just before falling asleep, where this one happens to. This is called Any Amount of Crickets. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of just before you fall asleep, you get this great idea, or this great line for a poem, or this great lyric for a song, or this great solution to some problem in your life, and then you go, I'm too tired to get up and write it down, but I'll write it down first thing tomorrow. And then it's gone forever and you never have it again. Some of my very best lines in my whole life I lost in sleep because I couldn't get up and write them down. Well, this poem is the first time I laid in and had some lines of a poem come to mind. And when I woke up the next day, I was talking to somebody on the phone, and they said a word, and I wrote the poem down, and I still had it. So there's hope for those of us that do our best work in sleep and then lose it. Any Amount of Crickets. I could be any woman in the world, and you, any man. This bed, iron, in a nearly naked room. This bed and a window where the light leaks in against all my best effort could be anybody's bed. Outside, a field of how many million yellow and then blue something. And in the shell of air, I hear the ocean in the freeway, where a man deep in waves swings his long hair in an arc. In our eyes, drops of water fly from him like new stars. Constellations are born this way, in the most casual gestures. Any amount of breathing, any amount of crickets chittering, any two people whose hearts line up, lie down together. Sky overhead, night tossing like a sleepless mind. This world, how we think we have it memorized. First three true accounts, right? Yeah. Okay. This poem is composed of 3 sections, and each one is a word that I looked up in the dictionary. And it's the etymology of language is bizarre. And this poem, I looked up the words husband, devil, and hell. Not that there is a connection. Just that's what I was thinking about. I think about those things a lot. But they're not necessarily connected. Husband. Husband has a bumblebee in the middle that hums in the mouth of a woman who pronounces it gladly. The first half of the first half of the word is a loose woman or a small sewing kit. Huzzy. Husband. Correlative of wife. Tiller of the ground. Hoose, house. Bunda, head. This house has a bee in its bonnet. This house has a wood floor. Those are my hips. My head I will have for a table. A little husband in my hand. Up the long stairway to the turret, to a round room. A small sink. Real water. His warmth. His press. His fit against my body. I wake to find the bear, the stranger in the boxcar, The sound of someone walking towards me through tall sunflowers, all changed back now into the husband. Hell. No, devil. Sorry, devil. Devil comes like ballistic and diabolic from diabolos, slanderer. Diabolos, a throwing across your path. Bolos, a hard wooden ball thrown at a summer picnic, comes into your sight line and then hits you in the head. He takes your soul as quick as that. Hell. A hidden place, like kel, which means covering, follows apocalypse, to uncover. Cell and cellar, both small rooms. Conceal and helmet, also hull, pod, occult, color and holster. Hell is a hall. Hall has a roof. Hell has 6 feet of dirt. That's all. I couldn't resist including a poem about my dog. I feel like, grandparents are supposed to keep the pictures of the grandkids in their pockets. So I try to keep the poems about my dogs in the drawer. But Dick insisted I do this one. It's called New Tricks. I'm the same old dog who sits in the yard all day watching the mountain. Sometime, somebody's going to leave that back gate open, and I'll rush like a burn up that hill, scattering the nest of wildcats, zippering my way across the face, while small explosions of birds predict my velocity and intent. I'm that same old dog that watched the red squirrel for a year, then waited beneath the bird feeder with my perfected aerial game, caught the tip of his tail in my teeth and hung. Did I eat him? Ask around. I'm Buster, who plucks them from the trees like plums. This poem is called The Cougar Pizza. When I moved from New York to Idaho, people in Idaho wanted to show me how rough and tough life was in the West. So they took me out shooting guns at hot springs, and somebody killed a cougar and made a pizza out of it. So that's this poem, The Cougar Pizza. A guy offered me a slice of cougar. He was proud of his illegal meat, held it wrapped in white paper. I saw it on the branch, tail twitching, pink sun bleeding into magenta heaven, a slice of coiled muscle, pale and tender as dusk on a frozen lake. And the last glance of the sun lights up in passing a blue-red forest on the far slope, the black shape of elk, green beneath the white, blue beneath the gray. The meat flares briefly in lustrous, concentric striations, and then leaps onto the back of a running figure. And what you now see this man slicing onto the pizza is only a shimmering image that runs away with itself. When Dick and I were talking about the music for that piece the other day, he said, humans don't eat carnivores. We were trying to think, well, do we eat cats or wolves? Which is kind of an interesting, because we eat everything else. I'm going to read you my poem that is in this collection here, and then we're going to have a 10-minute break, and there's food up here, and then I just want to tell you about reading out loud. There was a poll taken of American adults about what they were the most frightened of, and I would say, like, well, the guy with the hatchet and the ski mask in my backyard. And after that, it's the rabid skunk out by the trash waiting for me. After that, it's my car breaking down, and then it's the IRS. But none of those things even placed in the poll. What American adults are the most afraid of is speaking before a group, which I can't imagine. I would like to be permanently mic'd, surgically mic'd. But so the point of this is, if you get up and read your poetry, you're braver than most adults in America. And once you've reached that level of courage, then it's easier to be more and more courageous. So think about, courage is like lifting weights. You can build it. This poem is called Passion. Are you going to do something with this one?
You want to just read it?
No, I'd like it if you do music. Want to?
Okay, I'll make it up.
All right, make it up. Stump the drummer. Passion. Today my husband sandbagged Paddy Creek. All the runoff, all the rain made floods. And when school let out, he carried the children across the high water. When I was 5, our school flooded. Firemen in yellow slickers carried us from the classroom to the street. When he tells me about his day, I am a child lifted over rising water by a man she does not know and set upon higher ground. I embrace my husband, say, "Hero," but he's embarrassed. His face colors. I like this work, he tells me. That's all he wants to say. The minute I met him, I remembered how he helped me fly to dry land a long time ago. I have been searching for him since then. Thank you. Now we'll take 10 minutes. It's like 8:15, and you can come up here and get things to eat, and then you can read on TV yourself.
Would like to thank Eric and Ticey. Is it Ticey? Okay, and Nate and Tom and Karen for signing up to read. And we'll just go ahead and start with Eric. Eric is our video person tonight, and I want to thank Eric for shooting the series.
Yeah.
And so he's going to be our first reader. Eric is from Big Sky.
Thank you. My name is Eric Barnes, and I wrote this poem. It's about a color, and it describes a color. It gives it a personality. And so I'm going to read it to you. King Maroon III. I want to tell, says Maroon, an appalling yet savory secret. The black of the crow merges with the ruby forest. You called me a royal and billowed king. I feel young and powerful. The black side of the moon says quarrel, and I listen. The jewelry remains hidden in a palace bright as the red sun. I clench my fists as winds moan endlessly, falling from my throne into an abyss of sorrows. I hear haunting voices from the past. Dreaded shadows fall upon bloody battlegrounds. The soft sound of silk falls from the sky. I am forgotten, but I laugh on and on. That is my secret.
Thanks, Eric. Next we have Ticey. Ticey Gibbs from Big Sky.
Is there something that you would like?
Whatever you feel like. Nope. It's all up to you.
Oh, it is.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, my poem is called Puerta, and it means the door in Spanish. I am the sun, shining so green things grow below me. Your world has life, and I am pleased. I stare at a door to open and let day become night. I am the moon. Shutting the doors to daylight, I wait through the cool night. As I breathe, my breath turns to frosty stars who watch over you as I journey over the inky black sky to welcome day. There's the door.
Surprise.
Thanks, Ticey. And now we have Nate Schweber from Hillgate.
Can I read two? Two? I can? Okay.
What are you going to read first?
Okay, I'll do the one last Saturday. This one. Remember that? Yep. You play your bongo. Coolness. Okay. Well, the scoop behind this one is, last Saturday, they had this really cool poetry workshop here, and even though I can't write poetry, I always thought it'd be a cool thing to do, and so I figured I'd go to this workshop. And I was there, and they had us write a poem, and it's supposed to be in a chant, like a beat poem, like the I Am Waiting type thing, and so I wrote this, and it got some cool feedback, which feels good. But I was thinking about it, that I just whipped it off in 10 minutes, and it's not really something I worked hard on or put a lot of thought into or refined. So therefore, why am I bringing it back to another poetry reading? So I was thinking maybe it'd be cooler if I wrote something else, maybe that would justify it, or I put more time into it. But alas, I did not, and I guess I'm going to read it now. and he's going to play some bongos because it's kind of well, I told him this last Saturday, but I read this thing about Abbie Hoffman, and he said that bongos are the drum of revolution. So for that reason and that reason alone, poetic skeptic. I am waiting. I am waiting not to feel so damn self-conscious about my writing. I am waiting for a rebirth of rock and roll. I am waiting for the kids in this town to lose their apathy. I am waiting for a common vision. Wouldn't that be cool? I am waiting to become wise. I am hoping to become enlightened. I am waiting for the Rolling Stones to put out another album. I am waiting till I can make something happen despite the bureaucracy. I am waiting to write truth. I am waiting for a return of holiness the way Ginsberg sees it. I am waiting for some security in the future. I am waiting for a revolution, but not a bloody one. I'm waiting to read this poem and see what people think. I am waiting for some movers and shakers to unite. I am waiting for the day when people see the virtue in thinking. I am waiting for the day when we place more stock in idealism than realism. I am waiting for the day when statistics back up my point of view. I am waiting for the day when I can really write poetry. I am waiting to really say something cool. I am waiting for Dick's metronome to kick faster. I'm waiting for someone to run as a liberal. I'm waiting to see if I can really make it. I'm waiting to find out if idealism and enthusiasm is really enough. I am waiting for a beat. Okay, and I asked if I could read too, because you know I whipped that one out last Saturday. So I thought it would just justify me reading a bit more if I whipped one out here, and me and Thomas were talking about it, about, you know, is this inspiration? Should I be writing this stuff down? Will I forget about it? Is it like a dream? Something like that. But then, yeah, so I wrote this, and yeah, and do your thing, man.
Yeah, man.
Okay. Today, Missoula, tomorrow, the world. That's the feeling you get at these poetry readings. But not the feeling you get when you're in high school. High school's supposed to be real life. Things that count. Things that matter. But poetry readings are organic, esoteric, wishy-washy, stuff that has no connection to real life. Just dreams. So which is better? Intangible hope or tangible dissatisfaction? And why do I feel that way?
Hey, thanks, Nate. And also from Yellgate High School, we have Thomas Chapman.
Yes. I love that.
Okay. My poem's about colors. Colors cover all winds of stories, no matter it be of the tropic or the Arctic. Colors fill your mind, from the lion to the massive glaciers, perspiring in the rainforest, freezing in a snow cave. The colors always change, bright and dull, green, a leaf, seaweed, or spruce, blue, dark as night, bright as midday, red and yellow, a sunset in Missoula, the world, home of color.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Tom. Nate alluded to a great workshop we had on Saturday that Karen and Cheryl and Dick were at, and it was really a lot of fun. Nate and Tom and Allie were there, and we had such a good time that we hoped to have another one. And so I'll let Karen talk about it. And she's also going to share one of her poems.
Well, I don't know really what to say except that there'll be more of the same on November 16th. And what's so cool about this workshop is you write a poem and you get to perform it with Dick, who makes everyone sound like a superstar. So I recommend you coming. And I think we grabbed someone from the hallway who had no intention of even coming, and someone who had just finished graduate school decided to become a young adult for another day. And everyone wrote spectacular poems just in the spur of the moment. And I brought in the chant poem idea with a poem that Fairlyn Getty wrote called I Am Waiting, which Nate worked off of. And I also wrote an I Am Waiting poem that day, which I'll share with you today. I am waiting for Ed McMahon to call me up on my remote phone and tell me I've won $1 million. I'd run outside while talking to him and do a hula dance in the front yard, right there among the dry, tumble-down leaves and wind-worn political signs. Afterwards, I'd buy a big house and throw a party for everyone in Missoula. The chief of police and fire inspectors would be welcome. I served coconut milkshakes and gourmet chocolates from the Bon Marché. We'd play pin the tail on the pumpkin. And I'd give away neon-colored yo-yos to everyone over 50 and $1,000 IRAs to all the children. I'm waiting for winter to come and the election to be over. I'm waiting to turn up the heat and climb in bed for a very long time. Thanks.
Do any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask any of the readers tonight, or ask Dick about any of his percussion table instruments or the process? I hope you'll remember November 16th. It's free. It's a Saturday. It'll probably be terrible weather. You wouldn't want to be outside anyway, so write it down and think about coming. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask? Would you like to try any of Dick's bizarre noise-making machinery? We have goat toes up here.
I have all kinds of things. I'll talk to you for a second. Suzette had asked me to speak a little bit about what I talk to groups about when I work with Cheryl or when I work with poetry. It's very similar to working with dancers, and then for me, from the age of 10, working with other musicians. So most of what I do is a reaction to what I hear. So most of what I'm trying to do up here isn't play at all. I'm spending most of my time listening to what's going on, and probably a third of what's going on is silence. And so nothingness has a lot to do with where this comes from. So if you can think of how a pond has a lot of little ripples in it, and at times you can look out there and it's like glass. It's trying to get as smooth a piece of glass, or as smooth as the water can be, to start something. So being able to listen and be able to find a space to start is part of it. The other part of it is whether to create what I would call an ostinato or repeating pattern of either sound or rhythm for a person to speak over and wait for places to stop and then start again, or to actually play with spaces that are already in the words. So after working with this for a couple of years, I'm learning some different ways that poets write. So sometimes there's spaces on a page that I can see with my eyes, and there's actually spaces there when they speak. And there are times when a poem just has spaces in it because of the content as well. So like half the stuff you heard tonight I'd never even heard before. Some of the stuff I did with Cheryl I had seen before, some of it I saw for the first time yesterday, and I came today and she rewrote those. Which was a pleasant surprise, actually. So of all of these instruments that I have here, most of them are very non-traditional instruments, or the way they're being used is also non-traditional. So I have cymbals, which we use at a drum set, but I'm not using them in that context here. I have a lot of African and Afro-Cuban percussion that's not being used in that context. So I'm crossing the context of the instruments. So it sounds kind of fresh and new to me and to a lot of musicians. And because it's unfamiliar, to have it with spoken word isn't quite as much of a challenge, I'm finding. I've worked with a lot of different musicians doing this, and last year produced a CD, an album with Cheryl on it, that has 5 other musicians and me doing a lot of what you see me doing here. And in working in different small groups of those people, in pairs or in trios of us doing different things, people really react to the instruments my friends play. People see my friend's soprano saxophone and they think it's a clarinet, and all the images of the clarinet come up, and he hasn't even played it yet. And another friend of mine plays guitar, and when we hear a guitar, let alone see a guitar, we have these stereotypical images, as open as we all want to be. We just do. And so, you know, goat toes don't have much of an image until you know that they're goat toes. And when I'm doing this and they're black, you don't really know what they are. They just have this sound. And it's with poetry, not music, so God knows what it is. So to have the non-traditional kind of odd and abstract crossing has been really an inspirational thing for me as a drummer, you know, playing drum set and playing conga drums in bands. It's a really new thing for me. And again, it comes mostly from listening, you know, which is something that I wish a lot of people around me did a lot more. To just listen a little bit more. A lot of musicians that I've played with work very hard to play their instrument. And when you're actually playing music, the people I've had the most pleasure playing with, and some of the most successful musicians in the world that I have played with, really spend very little of their time playing their instrument when they're actually playing in a band or playing with other people or performing. They spend at least 80% of their time, way over half, they would say, and as I would say, listening first. And if we can't hear, so playing loud music as a rock musician has been really hard for me because I can't hear what's going on very well. It's always so noisy. And so I have to just play no matter what I'm hearing. It's like, well, Dick, it doesn't matter that you can't hear the vocalist. The PA's working. Yours isn't. And so I just keep playing, but I've gotten this, I can't hear the singer. So to be able to hear is really important to me. Without being able to hear, it's really hard. As a recording musician in recording studio, it's been very difficult for me because if I can't hear it through the headphones, I can't play very well. So I don't do much studio work because of that. There's a lot of people in the studio play regardless of what they hear. They play a certain thing anyway. That's a different kind of a strength. But, listen to silence. That's my recommendation. Hey, thank you.